Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The alien Beastwoman who lives in the caverns thinks I'm her mate. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Gavin's boots crunched against gravel, the sound lost beneath the low whine of his breathing gear. The cavern's heat pushed against his skin, humid and close, as if the air were alive and pressing back. He had been crawling through this maze of tunnels for what felt like hours, his flashlight flickering with each step. He hadn't planned on ending up this deep. The job had been simple: map a few veins, collect mineral samples, and report back to the outpost. But a tremor had cracked the rock beneath his feet, sending him plummeting into this forgotten hole in the planet's crust. His radio was dead, and his locator pinged nothing but static. Above him loomed dozens of meters of solid crystal and broken shale, with unknown tunnels glowing faintly like bioluminescent veins. He wasn't panicking, not yet. Years of mining in hostile environments had carved the panic out of him, leaving only grit and calculation. Still, even grit could be worn down. His oxygen meter blinked yellow, 2 hours of breathable air left if he kept calm, less if he didn't. He crouched beside a jagged outcrop and tapped his emergency beacon, but the rock ate the signal as if it had a hunger for hope. He considered climbing, but the walls sloped inward, smooth with mineral runoff. Every attempt to ascend had ended with him sliding back down, his palms bloodied and ribs bruised as souvenirs. No climbing was done. Forward was the only option left. The tunnel widened ahead, opening into a strange, circular chamber. The walls were covered in clustered crystals that shimmered with a soft, pulsating light. It wasn't artificial, but it wasn't natural either. Too symmetrical, too organized, as if something had shaped it long ago and the planet had simply forgotten to bury the truth. Gavin stepped carefully, not trusting anything in this place. Every instinct screamed to backtrack, to wait it out, ration oxygen, sleep in shifts, but he didn't have time. His pulse was steady, yet he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. Then he heard it, not a voice, not footsteps, a low click followed by a soft trill that echoed strangely through the space. He froze, crouched low with his hand slipping toward the laser cutter holstered at his hip. The sound came again, click, trill, pause, and this time it was closer. It wasn't human, nor was it mechanical, something organic, intelligent. A new sound followed, lighter, almost like breath against glass. Gavin turned slowly, his flashlight raised. She was there, standing motionless at the edge of the chamber. Her white fur glowed, her green eyes shone, and her ears, too large for her head, twitching subtly like radar dishes. She stood taller than him by at least a foot, narrow-limbed and strong. Her hands were clawed but relaxed at her sides. No clothes adorned her, only bands of fabric and bone trinkets tied around her forearms and thighs like armor or status symbols. Her chest rose slowly as she stared at him, not blinking. She tilted her head, sniffed the air, then stepped forward. Deliberately, Gavin didn't move or breathe. She was a Beastwoman, one of the rumored cavern dwellers the miners joked about after too many drinks. Stories said they were ghosts, survivors of an ancient crash, or monsters evolved from wildlife. No one believed it, no one was supposed to, but here she was, real. Her gaze was sharp with thought, not that of a monster, nor that of a mindless thing. She was simply assessing him. He straightened slowly, showing no threat. "I'm not here to fight," he said in a low, firm voice. She blinked once, tilting her head again, and stepped closer. He led her without flinching, even when she came within arm's reach. She raised a hand, not to strike, but to touch, her clawed fingers brushing the side of his helmet, light as a breeze. She murmured a sound, almost like a question, but it wasn't in any language he knew. Then she moved behind him fast. He spun instinctively, but stopped himself from drawing his cutter. She wasn't attacking, she was sniffing again, marking his scent. He didn't know, but when she came back around, she pressed her hand to his chest, not hard, not violently, just in contact. She murmured again and stepped back, her gaze locked on him with a certainty that felt final. She thought he belonged to her. Gavin swallowed, unsure whether to laugh or panic. "You've got the wrong guy," he muttered, but she only blinked as if she understood the tone, if not the words. She turned, then motioned with her hand, beckoning him to follow. When he hesitated, she didn't stop. She simply walked into the far tunnel, confident he would come. And damn it, he did. Following her was both insane and necessary. The tunnels were endless, and if she knew a way out, or at least to breathable air, he had no choice. He kept pace, watching the subtle sway of her movement, the grace in how she navigated the terrain. She clicked and chirped now and then, sending sounds bouncing ahead like echolocation. Her world was sound and silence, not light. Gavin's flashlight flickered again, weaker now. They entered another chamber, this one narrower, with roots hanging from the ceiling and glowing fungus growing along the floor. She paused, motioned for him to sit, then vanished down a side tunnel. He considered running. He could backtrack, maybe try a different path, but even thinking that felt stupid. He'd be dead without her. He knew it, so he sat and waited. When she returned, she carried something wrapped in leaves, a kind of dried meat. Perhaps she handed it to him without hesitation. He took it unsure, but ate it. It wasn't terrible. He nodded his thanks. She sat beside him, not close enough to touch, but not far either. Her oversized ears twitched again, and she turned to him with a strange look, curious, gentle, maybe even proud. Gavin leaned back against the wall, exhausted and still catching up. She watched him for a while, then lay down across from him, her eyes slowly closing. He stared at the crystals, glowing in pulse with his heartbeat. He didn't know what this was yet. This Beastwoman, this city, this planet. But something told him he had just stepped into a world no human had ever truly seen, and somehow he wasn't alone in it anymore. Gavin awoke to the sound of low clicking, soft and rhythmic, like pebbles tapping together in a deliberate pattern. He opened his eyes slowly, his body sore yet intact, muscles tight from sleeping on cold stone. The cavern was dim, the bioluminescent crystals still glowing faintly above. Across from him, the Beastwoman was already on her feet, ears alert, head tilted slightly as if listening to something he couldn't hear. In this light, she looked less like something conjured from a drunken miner's tall tale and more like a sentinel guarding the border between worlds. She didn't startle when he stirred. She simply turned to him, eyes glowing a soft green, and gestured silently before stepping into another tunnel without a word. He followed, his legs stiff yet his step steady. The food she'd given him had settled well, and the air, though dense and strange, now seemed breathable as his suit's reserves were low. She didn't speak, nor did she slow down for him, but she glanced back once to make sure he was still behind her. The tunnels twisted into strange spirals and led into a larger corridor where the light from the walls turned a cool blue. The sound changed too. Echoes no longer bounced chaotically, but rolled gently down the hallway like a hum. Gavin realized the architecture wasn't natural. It had been shaped, molded with intent. The walls bore faint carvings, ridges, and lines that felt more like writing than decoration. They entered a massive chamber, part cathedral, part nest. Dozens of other Beastwomen moved through the space, some perched on ledges, others gliding along the floor with a grace he could never mimic. They paused when they saw him, heads turning, ears twitching. Some made soft trills, others snorted in disapproval or curiosity. Gavin stood tall and didn't flinch. He walked into boardrooms full of hostile corporate men, and this wasn't all that different, just fuzzier. His silent companion placed herself between him and the others, giving a low rumble from deep in her chest. Whatever she said or sang made several of them back off. A taller Beastwoman with gray-streaked fur stepped forward, draped in bone charms and bioluminescent threads. Her eyes narrowed at him, and she clicked her teeth, speaking something sharp and questioning. Gavin said nothing, just held her gaze, letting his silence carry weight. His guide spoke. Then Gina, he decided to call her, needing a name to make this feel less like a dream. Her voice was softer than that of the elders, but firm, each note echoing with layers he couldn't translate. The elder gave a final click, then turned away. The tension thinned slightly, but eyes still followed him wherever he moved. Gina led him through the crowd into a side chamber that felt more personal, with carved stone bowls, animal skins, and clusters of fruit and meat drying on racks. She motioned for him to sit again and placed something warm in his hands, a flat, cooked disc of meat layered with something sweet. He nodded his thanks and ate it. It was strange, but good. She knelt across from him, watching and studying his face as if learning every shift in expression. Then, without warning, she reached toward his chest again, this time touching the spot above his heart, and pressed lightly. Her other hand touched her own chest in the same spot. A gesture, a claim, not threatening, not aggressive, just certain. "I'm not yours," he said, voice low and tired. "You don't even know me." But the words felt thin even to him. He didn't pull away. She didn't understand his words, but she tilted her head. For the first time, she spoke something that wasn't just a sound, it was a name. Gavin's breath caught. She had been listening. He leaned forward, tapping his chest once. "Gavin," he repeated slower. She nodded, pleased, then tapped her own chest and said, Gina. So that was her name. He smiled despite himself. Gina, all right. She clicked something approvingly, then stood and beckoned him again. They walked through a narrow corridor that wound downward, deeper than any part of the cave he had seen so far. The air grew cooler, more metallic. Strange lights flickered at the edge of his vision. Eventually, they emerged into a long hall, walls lined with enormous slabs of black crystal that reflected not just their image but flickering echoes of movement that had already passed, as if the caverns remembered the steps taken inside them. Gina touched the surface of one and let out a soft, harmonic note. The crystal pulsed once, and a ripple of sound rolled through the room. He realized this was no primitive tribe. These people, these beastwomen, lived in a city built on resonance, on memory and sound. The tunnels were alive with echoes of the past, and she was showing it to him, not as a prisoner, but as someone invited into the truth. Gavin stepped forward, resting his hand against the crystal. It was cold, smooth, and pulsating faintly beneath his fingers. For a moment, he saw something flash across it, not his reflection, but a memory of himself falling into the tunnel. Gina was watching him from the shadows. She had seen him before, she had helped him, she had chosen him. He turned to her, questions mounting. Why me? He asked. Why bring me down here? She didn't answer in words, but she stepped close and touched his hand again, bringing it to her chest and holding it there, not possessive, not aggressive, as if she were showing him something sacred, something that didn't need translation. The silence between them felt deep and respectful. Gavin exhaled slowly, the stress of the past days finally letting go in waves. He was still trapped, still far from the surface, still without a real plan, but somehow that mattered less now. In this impossible world below, he wasn't just surviving anymore, he was being invited to live. That night they returned to her chamber, and Gina shared another meal. No words, no demands, just presence. She watched him carefully, as if weighing his soul rather than his strength. When he lay back against the wall to sleep, she curled up nearby, close but not touching. Her eyes closed only after his did, and he slept without fear for the first time in years. Gavin stirred from sleep with the warm sense that something had shifted. The cavern still glowed faintly, the soft pulse of crystal light washing over the room like a heartbeat. Gina wasn't beside him anymore. Instead, she stood by the entrance of the chamber, her ears angled sharply and her body tense. The fur along her shoulders bristled as she stared down the corridor, her hand resting near the jagged knife tied to her hip. Gavin rose without asking, rubbing sleep from his face as he stepped beside her and followed her gaze into the shadows beyond. Something had disturbed her, and though he couldn't hear it, the way her muscles were wired with silent alarm told him enough. She clicked her teeth once, a sound that bounced through the hallway and returned in a muted echo. Her ears twitched in response, catching something that escaped his human senses. Gavin squinted, adjusting his vision to the dim light. At first he saw nothing, no figures, no threats, but then a subtle movement flickered at the edge of the tunnel wall. A shadow slipped away like smoke, leaving behind a strange tension in the air. Gina didn't chase it. Instead, she turned to him, tapped her chest once, then his, and pointed to the far side of the chamber with a firm command, "Stay close." He nodded, already stepping into motion. Whatever had been watching them was gone now, but Gina didn't relax. She led him deeper into the caves with more urgency than before. Her movements were sharp and exact. They passed other beastwomen along the way, most of whom gave Gina nods of recognition or murmured quick words he didn't understand. No one challenged her. In fact, they seemed to step out of her way, some casting wary glances at Gavin, others offering him curious stares, as if he were part of some rumor spreading quietly through the stone. He caught fragments of their speech, soft echoes, musical tones, and realized that Gina's tribe wasn't just coexisting underground. They were organized, they had hierarchy, order, customs, and something about him was shifting the balance. When they entered another chamber, this one circular and lined with thin crystal mirrors, Gina paused and motioned for him to stop. The floor was patterned with symbols he didn't recognize, but Gina moved through them with practiced steps, each footfall deliberate and precise. Gavin stayed at the edge, watching as she circled the center. Her voice rose in a strange melody. It wasn't words, not like human speech, but it held tone, structure, and tension as she sang. The crystals along the wall vibrated in reply, casting light across her fur in ripples. Her song controlled the room. Then the largest crystal, black and smooth like obsidian, shifted. A groove opened in its center, revealing a carved altar beneath it. Gina approached it slowly, her voice fading to a whisper, and retrieved something from inside a strip of leather bound with pale strands of glowing thread. She brought it to him, placed it in his hand without explanation, and looked up at him with a steady gaze. He examined it. It was old, clearly crafted with care, but what struck him most was the symbol etched into the leather. An identical match to the insignia that had once appeared on his mining suit, not modern but ancient and weathered. He looked at Gina sharply. "Where did you get this?" he asked, not expecting an answer, but she tapped her chest again and then pointed to the cavern walls. She wasn't claiming she had made it. She was saying it came from her world, from this place. The implication hit him like a hammer. Humanity hadn't been the first to mine this planet. They weren't the first to come here. Someone from Earth had been here long ago, and somehow the Beastwomen had preserved a part of that contact, maybe even woven it into their culture. The leather strap wasn't just a relic. It was proof he was standing in a place with ancient ties to human presence. Gina had known. She stepped closer again, slowly and without hesitation, and tied the strap around his arm. Her hands were careful, her eyes never leaving his. The moment the knot was secure, she let out a low, satisfied hum and brushed her fingers once across his shoulder, another symbol, another mark. The meaning wasn't lost on him. Gina was claiming him in front of her people. This wasn't just protection, it was ritual. Gavin didn't resist. He didn't fully understand the culture yet, but he wasn't blind. Her gestures were deliberate, filled with quiet weight. She wasn't forcing him. She was offering him a place, and something told him that rejecting it outright would not only offend her but cut off a lifeline he hadn't yet grasped. He met her gaze and placed his hand gently over hers. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I'm not running." She didn't smile, not fully, but something in her eyes softened. She let him out again, this time walking beside him rather than ahead. There was no audience now, only quiet corridors and faint echoes. They returned to her chamber slowly, neither in a rush. When they arrived, she didn't gesture for him to sleep against the wall as before. Instead, she sat beside the soft bedding of furs and nodded to the space beside her. He hesitated only a moment before sitting down. She rested her head against his shoulder, not in passion, but in trust, as if she needed to feel him breathing to confirm he was still there. They stayed like that for a long while, silent. Gavin stared up at the ceiling, his mind spinning with more questions than answers. He had come to this planet looking for minerals, trying to escape disgrace, exile, and the betrayal of people he once called teammates. Now he was part of something much older, more mysterious, and far more dangerous than any of that. And at the center of it all was Gina, the quiet, fierce creature who had found him when no one else would. Eventually, she rose and disappeared into a nearby tunnel, leaving him alone again. He lay back, arm across his chest where she had tied the strap. He could still feel her presence, still hear the fading hum of her voice echoing from the crystal walls. This was no longer just survival. He was part of something ancient, something sacred, and whether he understood it yet or not, he had already begun to change. The following day began with vibration more than sound, a low, throbbing pulse that seemed to rise from the very stone beneath Gavin's back. He opened his eyes slowly, noting how the crystals embedded in the chamber walls shimmered brighter, their glow shifting in time with the pulse like a warning or a message. Gina was already gone. Her absence didn't surprise him. The night before had been quiet, thoughtful, even intimate in its own way, but there was no illusion of ownership between them, just mutual recognition. She had marked him, yes, but not like some pet claimed by a master. It felt more like being named in a place where names carried weight. As he stood and stretched, the ache from his shoulders still lingering, Gavin could still feel the tightness of the leather band she had tied around his arm. It wasn't just a relic, it was a part of him. Without waiting for her to return, he left the chamber and followed the only route he had memorized from the previous days, a spiraling passage that led back to the main gathering chamber. Along the way, he passed two younger beastwomen, smaller than Gina and less adorned. They paused when they saw him, whispering sounds back and forth, and one of them pointed toward the passage he had just come from, accompanied by a clicking laugh. He didn't understand the joke, it was at his expense. Still, he didn't lower his gaze, he kept walking. The central chamber was louder than usual. A group of beastwomen stood in a semicircle facing one of the elders, their voices raised in overlapping clicks and tones. Gina was there, standing at the outer edge with her arms crossed and ears angled slightly backward, a posture Gavin had learned meant irritation. She noticed him as soon as he entered and gestured for him to stay back. He did, watching from the shadows as the discussion intensified. Though he couldn't understand the language, it didn't take much to read the mood. Something had happened, something serious. Eventually, the group broke apart. Gina walked over to him, her stride tense and wordless. She reached for his hand and pulled him down one of the lesser-used tunnels. He followed without resistance. Her grip wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel either, just firm, insistent. When they stopped at a quiet chamber, she turned to face him and began speaking in short, clipped bursts, her voice lower than usual and filled with urgency. He caught fragments, his name, the word for outsider, and a tone that made his chest tighten. She was warning him. Gavin stepped closer, trying to calm her. "What is it? What's going on?" he asked. He knew she didn't fully understand, but something in his voice softened her expression. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her chest, then pointed upward toward the surface. Then she tapped the crystal walls, clicking out a pattern and miming a falling motion. Gavin froze, his mind clicking the pieces together. Something or someone was coming from above. He thought back to the pulse he had felt that morning, not random but seismic activity, subtle yet distinct. Perhaps the humans had found something, or worse, they were looking for him. His pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. Gina stepped forward and reached into a pouch at her side, pulling out a fragment of metal, clean, smooth, unmistakably man-made. She held it out to him. He took it and turned it over in his hand. It was a piece of mining equipment, torn off likely from a probe, that confirmed it. The colony was sending scouts. Maybe they had followed his last known coordinates, or perhaps they had picked up the weak trace of his emergency beacon before it died completely. Either way, they were here now, and they were digging. He met Gina's gaze and shook his head slowly. "They won't stop," he said. "They think this place is empty." Then after a pause, he added, "Or maybe they don't." Gina didn't need a translator to understand the danger in his tone. She stepped back, her eyes narrowing, her posture shifting from concern to command. She clicked her teeth again, then beckoned him to follow. This time, they took a route he hadn't seen before, one that led to the far edge of the underground city. As they walked, the walls changed. They were less polished, more raw. These weren't inhabited chambers. These were the outskirts, tunnels used only when danger called for retreat or regrouping. They reached a ledge that overlooked a massive pit down below. The tunnel split into 3 arteries, all leading deeper into the unknown. Gina pointed to the center one, then to Gavin, and made a motion of shielding. She wanted him to go into hiding, to stay safe while she and the others dealt with whatever was coming. He didn't like it. He hated being sidelined, but he also knew she wasn't doing it to humiliate him. This wasn't about pride, it was about survival. Still, he stepped closer and said firmly, "I'm not running, I'm not leaving you to fight alone." She stared at him, expression unreadable, then slowly raised a hand and placed it on his shoulder. Her touch was lighter this time, less a command and more a request. He covered her hand with his, and for a moment they just stood there, listening to the faint vibrations moving through the stone. The threat was real. The humans were coming, and if they found this place, they'd tear it apart without hesitation, not because they were evil, but because they didn't understand. They would see alien creatures, old ruins, and valuable materials, not a home, not a people. Gina turned and led him back, not toward her chamber this time, but to a narrow corridor with tight walls and a low ceiling. At the end was a small alcove with stone bedding and a hollowed-out space in the wall filled with tools, a shelter of sorts. She pointed at it, clearly indicating it would be his if things went bad. He didn't argue, he just nodded. Then, unexpectedly, she stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture he hadn't seen before but instinctively recognized as deeply intimate. When she pulled back, there was a subtle shift in her eyes, a kind of silent promise. Gavin watched her go alone again and then leaned against the cold wall of the shelter. He stared at the leather band on his arm, then at the metal fragment in his hand. Everything was changing. The fragile balance between 2 worlds had been cracked open, and now he had to decide where he stood. He already knew. The first explosion didn't shake the caverns so much as ripple through them, like a pulse twisting down the walls and echoing through the crystal veins. Gavin felt it in his chest before he even heard the distant, deep, wrong thunderclap growing closer. He shot up from the stone bed in the shelter. His heart pounded, his eyes quickly adjusted to the shifting glow in the walls. The crystals were brighter now, and the vibrations they emitted felt like an alarm, ancient and instinctive. Something had been disturbed. No, not something, everything. Another explosion came seconds later, closer this time, followed by a tremor that knocked dust and debris from the ceiling. Gavin didn't hesitate. He grabbed the emergency pack that Gina had left for him and sprinted into the corridor, not toward safety, but toward the deeper halls, toward her. The city was in chaos, not wild screaming or panicked running, but a kind of focused urgency. The Beastwomen moved like coordinated wolves, communicating in rapid clicks and chirps. Their movements were practiced and efficient. Gavin recognized several of them from the council-like gatherings days before, elders and warriors, now armed with crystalline blades and bone-plated armor. No one stopped him, no one questioned him. They all knew why he was there. Gina found him before he reached the central chamber, emerging from a side tunnel as if she had been waiting for him. She didn't speak, only grabbed his arm and pulled him into step beside her. Her eyes were hard with focus but burned with relief. She didn't try to send him away. This time she knew better, and he wasn't going anywhere. They followed a group of fighters down a passage Gavin had never seen before, one that sloped slightly upward, carved directly into a sheer wall of solid mineral, with pulsating veins of blue and violet crystal every few feet to light their path, revealing ancient carvings along the way, symbols he couldn't read but recognized as warnings. They stopped at a chamber that opened onto a ledge overlooking a long tunnel where the stone was fractured and smoking. Gina pointed through the haze. Gavin followed her gesture and saw humans in pressurized suits marked with the mining company's emblem. They were pushing deeper, scanners in hand, drilling gear packed along, and modular drones crawling beside them like insects. A scout team, not soldiers, but they had weapons clipped to their backs and enough explosives to level half the cavern. Gina turned to him and clicked something low and steady. He didn't need to understand the words to grasp the meaning. They were trespassing, and they would destroy everything if they kept going. He stepped closer to the edge, his eyes narrowing. "They're looking for resources," he whispered. "Maybe they picked up a signal or some trace of my gear, or maybe they just thought this place was empty, but they won't stop unless we make them." He tapped her claw against the rock, then against her blade, and gave her a firm look. This wasn't a negotiation. It was going to end in blood. His stomach twisted, not out of fear, but out of obligation. He didn't want to fight, but he knew what these men were capable of. If they found this place, they'd tear it apart in the name of progress. They'd call the Beastwomen hostile, call Gina a threat, and they'd never ask what was already here before they arrived. He took a breath and looked back at her. "Let me try first," he said. "Let me talk to them." She hesitated, her ears twitched uncertainly, but eventually she stepped aside. Gavin walked carefully down the slope, hands visible, making no sudden moves. As soon as the nearest drone spotted him, alarms pinged and rifles came up. 3 men shouted, voices muffled behind their visors, "Identify yourself." He raised his hands higher. "Gavin Rourke, Mining Division 2, presumed dead 17 days ago." The lead man stepped forward, recognizing the name. "Rourke, what the hell? We thought you were buried." "I was, Gavin," he replied, "but I wasn't alone down here." There was silence for a beat, then the second man scoffed. "You're with the creatures." Gavin nodded. "They saved me. They live here. This is their home." The third man, younger, glanced toward the tunnel behind Gavin, clearly uneasy. "We're here to extract samples, not start a war." "That's exactly what you'll do if you go any further," Gavin said calmly. "This place isn't just tunnels and rock, it's a city. They've got systems, traditions, structure. They've been here longer than we've even known this planet had a lower crust." The lead man didn't lower his weapon. "Command wants results. Rare mineral readings spiked near this location. We're under orders to collect." "If you keep drilling," Gavin warned, "you'll trigger a collapse. The crystal formations are holding more than just the city together. They're part of the structural integrity of this whole sector." "You expect us to believe you're suddenly a geologist now?" the lead man snapped. "No, I expect you to believe I've spent 2 weeks down here, and I've seen what happens when you mess with these tunnels without understanding them. And I expect you to believe that the people living here won't let you take what's theirs without a fight." The leader seemed to consider that, but his grip didn't loosen. "So what, we're supposed to turn around because some cave-dwelling aliens gave you food?" Gavin's voice hardened. "I'm telling you to turn around because if you don't, we'll stop you." A tense silence stretched, then the lead man spoke into his comms. "Command, we've got a live situation, complicated, locals not friendly." There was static, then a faint reply he couldn't make out. The leader looked back at Gavin with something close to disappointment. "They're sending reinforcements." "Of course they are," Gavin muttered. He backed away slowly. "Then we'll be ready." He turned and ran. By the time he reached Gina, she had already mobilized the fighters. They moved without chaos, prepared and practiced. Gavin found himself handed a weapon, an old mining tool modified with crystal enhancements. Gina didn't speak, she just touched his chest briefly, then moved to take point. He fell into formation behind her, adrenaline washing away any last doubt. The fight would come not because they wanted it, but because it had been forced on them, and when it did, he knew exactly where he stood. The battle didn't start with noise, it began with silence, a heavy, charged stillness that draped over the caverns like a thick fog. Everyone felt it. The Beastwoman crouched behind jagged cover and crystal walls, muscles tense, ears twitching in rhythm with the subtle vibrations traveling through the stone. Gina stood at the front, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the tunnel ahead where the human drill team had set up camp. Gavin stood beside her, weapon in hand, his heart pounding. He had been in tight spots before, corporate sabotage investigations, contract disputes that turned ugly, even a few security drills gone bad, but nothing like this. This wasn't about bonuses or quarterly profits. This was a home, their home, and the invaders didn't care what lived beneath the rock, only what they could strip from it. That realization hit him harder now, knowing what these people had shown him, knowing who Gina was. When the first drone crept into view, its legs clicking quietly across the stone, Gina raised a hand. The line of warriors around her froze. Gavin could see their disciplined formation. This wasn't some tribal mob reacting to fear these women had trained. They understood patience, they understood tactics. The drone scanned the tunnel, then turned back to relay its signal. That was the opening. Gina let out a sharp trill and launched forward. The others followed without hesitation. Gavin moved with them. What followed wasn't chaos, it was control. The Beastwomen struck fast and with precision, targeting weak points, disabling equipment before it could turn against them. Their blades weren't crude. They were curved and balanced, designed to work with their anatomy and within the confines of the tunnels. Within seconds, the forward perimeter was overwhelmed. Gavin and two others flanked the left edge, taking out a control panel that fed into the mining rig's remote system. Sparks flew, and the drones, powering up for retaliation, went dark in an instant. Gina roared, not like an animal, but like a warning, and Gavin saw one of the humans turn and run, abandoning his gear. The lead tech tried to call for backup, but his signal never got through. One of the Beastwomen had already destroyed the comms repeater. The humans hadn't expected this kind of coordination. They thought they were stepping into a primitive space with unorganized creatures. What they got was a counterattack planned with military discipline. It wasn't long before the miners were either disarmed or fleeing, but it didn't end there. The explosions from earlier had damaged some of the surrounding tunnels, and the structural integrity was compromised. The crystals, once glowing calmly, began to flicker and dim in erratic pulses. Gina noticed it first. She clicked rapidly to a nearby warrior, and within seconds they were calling a retreat, not out of fear but strategy. This wasn't their battleground anymore. The caverns were shifting, and if they stayed too long, the fight would bury them all. Gavin followed Gina through a side tunnel as the walls began to creak and groan. Crystal shards dropped from above, shattering near his feet. Behind them, the humans scattered, trying to regroup, some shouting through garbled comms that their exit route was blocked. Gina didn't hesitate. She led her people through a narrow channel that wound downward beneath the collapsing section. Gavin glanced back once and saw a drone crushed beneath a falling slab of stone. The message was clear. The caverns weren't just alive, they were defending themselves. Eventually, the group emerged into a massive underground basin, wider and more open than anything Gavin had seen so far. The ceiling rose high overhead, supported by natural pillars that shimmered faintly with veins of blue. Here, the tremors were weaker and the air cooler. The Beastwomen spread out, checking for injuries and regrouping. Gina turned to Gavin, her face unreadable. He expected anger, blame, maybe even resentment. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a hand gently against his jaw, her fingers brushing the edge of his beard. She said something in her native tongue, soft and low, and he caught only the tone, relief, gratitude, something deeper layered beneath. He placed his hand over hers, steady. I told you I wouldn't run, he said, and I won't. They stood like that for a moment, surrounded by her people, some of whom were beginning to see him differently now. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had fought beside them, risked the same collapse, and defended the same home. Whatever doubts they had once harbored about Gina's claim on him were no longer spoken. Later, as the group settled into makeshift rest points around the basin, Gina led him toward a stone alcove hidden behind a thin waterfall of mineral runoff. Inside was a small, circular chamber filled with low tones and the hum of resonance, the heartbeat of the caverns. She sat down and gestured for him to join her. When he did, she reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out another leather strap, this one thicker and older, its edges marked with symbols he had never seen before. Carefully, she tied it around his wrist and placed her hand over it. Then slowly, she began to speak in broken English. "You are not from here," she said, her voice hesitant but deliberate, "but you feel. Here you stay." Gavin blinked. She had been learning, listening slowly, piecing together his language while he tried to grasp hers. That changed everything. It wasn't just instinct or ritual that had driven her to claim him, it was understanding. "I want to stay," he said quietly, "if you'll have me." She tilted her head, considering him, then nodded once firmly. But before the quiet could fully settle, another tremor ran through the stone. This one wasn't natural. It carried the sharp, rhythmic thump of machines, something heavy drilling through upper layers again. Gavin stood and stepped to the edge of the alcove, eyes narrowing. "They're not done," he said. "They'll come back stronger." Gina joined him, her expression already steeled. She didn't need to say it. He saw the decision in her posture, in the way she stood beside him instead of ahead. This was no longer her fight alone. It never had been. They were partners now, bound not just by instinct but by choice. And whatever came next, they would face it together. Gavin stood near the edge of the alcove, watching the faint shimmer of the basin outside shift and pulse with light. The crystals embedded in the cavern walls reacted more and more violently with each passing minute. The rhythm was no longer peaceful but erratic. Something above was agitating them. Machinery, maybe even heavier mining drills, the kind that vibrated through straight walls and destabilized everything below. The tremors were more focused now, not like the earlier blasts meant to open a general path but strategic, directed. The colony wasn't just probing, they were coming for something specific. His gut twisted. Whether they knew it or not, they were tunneling straight toward the heart of the Beastwoman's territory, and they were going to break it apart if no one stopped them.